Happy Monday, everybody. My name is Scott Morganroth from the South Florida Tribune, and I am pleased to be joined by Florida Hockey Now's George Richards, a longtime colleague of mine. And George, thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to doing some Panther talk tonight.
Sounds good, Scott. How you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm doing really good, thanks. I've
Good,
actually
good.
just completed a book that I'm working on, and I'll give you more information as to when it gets released. But this one's going to have a lot to do with old school versus new school
All
media,
right.
and I think a lot of people that end up going out there and reading it will find out. Before we get to things, just want to let everybody know that Fire Up Florida is being broadcast around the world. The audio version of Fire Up Florida can be heard on iHeartRadio, Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your podcast. Please hit the red subscribe button on YouTube, South Florida Tribune. We're striving for 1,000 subscribers. Please also comment, like, and share the broadcast. Want to be a guest? Feel free to participate in the chat room or send your ideas to southfloridatribune@gmail.com. You want to advertise cost efficiently? Call me, 954-304-4941. Once again, we broadcast live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. My Twitter information is at Tribune South, and our website, www.southfloridatribune.com. All right, George, once again, a long time coming, but I'm glad we're doing this now here in August, because now that I know everybody's had an opportunity to settle in a little bit, people are going to be talking hockey pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the middle of August. It's the dead period, but
Right.
5 weeks, 6 weeks, training camp will get going. We'll have rookie camp coming up in Coral Springs, and then training camp. And before you know it, we'll have our preseason doubleheader, Panthers and Nashville from the arena in Sunrise. So, yeah, I mean, it's summertime. It does, it's as hot as it can be out there, but we'll get her going. It's pretty soon enough.
All right, so George, you've been covering the Panthers, okay, for 20 years,
Yeah.
but I want to ask you, tell me a little bit about Florida hockey now.
Well, FloridaHockeyNow.com is a site that I got going in 2020 during the pandemic. I was laid off by the Athletic. I was covering the Panthers for 3 seasons with the Athletic, and then the pandemic came, and they shut down their South Florida operations. And so I decided, I still had all these Panther stories to tell. Why not tell them online? So yeah, the FloridaHockeyNow.com. We cover the Panthers every day. We got a thing on Sasha Barkov tomorrow. So even during the dead times, we're covering the Panthers. We've got a story on them every single day. So check it out, FloridaHockeyNow.com.
Well, you know what? I am worldwide, but I'm Detroiter by heart. So we actually have a guy chiming in from Detroit, from Kneecap Fighting with Detroit Lions. Says good evening to us. So look at that. What can I tell you? He's chiming in there. Obviously respects the Red Wings and the Panthers a little bit, but
There
hey,
you
we'll
go. Love Detroit.
Wherever we can get them. How does that sound? Okay.
Hey, anytime we got some folks from Detroit coming in, that's great.
Yeah. Well, also, now that we bring that up, don't you have another? Is it a franchise up there called Detroit Hockey Now as well?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Florida Hockey Now is part of the National Hockey Now. There's 20 different locations or sites, and Detroit Hockey Now is one of them. So we haven't gotten to all 30, however many teams it is now, 32 teams in the National Hockey League, but we're getting there. So, yeah, Detroit's one of them. A lot of good Detroit Red Wing coverage. Who's Kevin Allen? If you remember him from USA Today. Bob Duff. Those guys are running Detroit Hockey Now, doing a heck of a job. So if you're a fan of the Red Wings or, any hockey, check it out. National Hockey Now. And, obviously we're here in Florida, but, chances are we're covering your team. We've got Philly, Colorado, San Jose, Los Angeles, Nashville, Buffalo. I'm not going to keep going, but it's a bunch of them.
Or we got the time, even if you wanted to, I would say.
That's right.
Hey, you know what? When you're a solo show like we are tonight, George, as far as I'm concerned, you could go out there and spend as long as you want. That's what friends are for.
We're good. They'll check it out. But yeah, no, a lot of good hockey coverage. And again, I mean, this is the dead period, and it's tough, especially for teams that didn't make the playoffs, right? I mean, their season's been over since April. I mean, it seemed, and I've had those. Listen, like I said, I started covering the Panthers in 2003. There have been a lot of bad years with the Panthers, a lot of long summers. Usually those years haven't been lately, but I was working at the Miami Herald covering the team then. So they just say, go cover the Marlins, go cover the Dolphins, do something else. But when you're a hockey beat writer and your team's knocked out in April or after game 82, boy, that's a long off season. Hockey has a long off season. So, for places like Detroit and Buffalo, teams that, had a decent year but didn't make the playoffs, these off seasons can be very, very long.
I can only imagine. All right, so George, let's talk about the job Bill Zito has done.
Okay.
Tell me, how would you assess the performance of Bill Zito?
It's been transformative. He took over in 2020, not long after we started Florida Hockey Now, a couple months after, because we covered the Panthers. Remember, if the pandemic, they had that bubble, that playoff bubble. Panthers get knocked out by the New York Islanders in the qualification round,
Right.
And the Panthers fire Dale Talon. They move on from Dale Talon, so they hire Bill Zito in September of 2020. Within 2 weeks, he's already traded Mike Matheson for Patrick Hornquist. Then free agency comes. He signs Radko Gudas. He signs Carter Verhaeghe. He signs Anthony DeClaire. He drafts Anton Lundell. This is all within a month, 6 weeks of being hired. And you look at the organization since that time, there's only 3 players left on it, and 4 if you count Eetu Luostarinen, who wasn't part of that 22. He was there, but he didn't play. You've got Sergei Bobrovsky, Sasha Barkov, Aaron Ekblad, and Eetu Luostarinen. Those are the only players left from that 2020 team. That was not that long ago. So he has totally turned over. Spencer Knight was the last player, the last first round pick by Dale Talon, but he's totally turned this organization upside down. He's rebuilt the roster, and he's traded his own guys now. So, and the results speak for themselves. The 2021 COVID year, they end up finishing second in the Atlantic. This year number 2, they end up winning the Atlantic. They end up winning the President's Trophy. They win their first playoff round since 1996. They lose in the second round to Tampa, which creates more changes. And then you had this year where they slip into the playoffs and then make it all the way to the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah. And
you look ahead, the Panthers, all their top guys are signed for at least the next couple years. So the best years of the Panthers might be ahead. Will they make it back to the Stanley Cup final? I don't know. I mean, you're a hockey guy. You know how tough it is to make it to the Stanley Cup. It just doesn't happen all the time. But this team could be better and not make it. You know what I mean? I mean, they may not make it as far as they did, but they might be better. We'll see. But the best years are ahead of this team.
Yeah, and I'm going to go each over the point that you mentioned in more detail. So I guess the thing I've noticed about Bill Zito to me is if John Wooden was called the Wizard of Westwood, we're going to call Bill Zito the Wizard of Sunrise.
Okay.
Because of all the moves this guy has made. It's not like he's the most complacent individual out there. He's not. I mean, this guy's not afraid to take a short-term deal, long-term deal. And again, we're going to get into the Keith Tkachuk, Jonathan Huberdeau deal a little bit later.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this guy, there's no panic in anything he's doing. He's willing to take a win now situation, a rental if he has to. And you want to talk about the bold nature of Bill Zito. I know I've watched, being from the Detroit area, Ken Holland make these kinds of moves too. But I think that Bill Zito, when I compare him and Holland was fine, but he had the resources of Mike Ilitch. Bill Zito has a much different situation where he has to get creative with the ownership that he does. And I think that's what makes him even so much better. I'm not knocking Ken Holland, but you know where I'm going from?
Well, people may not know this, but Vinny Viola is a multi-billionaire. So no, I mean, the Panthers lose money. Yes, I get where you're thinking.
Right.
The owner of the Panthers doesn't care if they make money. That's the difference.
Right.
Kind of like the Ilitches. If the Detroit Tigers aren't making money, they don't care. They're still putting money into it because they've got it. And the ownership in Florida got it. So they felt like, and we're going back to the ownership thing. They just felt like if they could be in the middle of attendance and of revenue, they're fine. And that's where they're at right now. So which wasn't the case when they bought the team. It wasn't the case 5 years ago. But, listen, Bill Zito, and with the salary cap, I mean, you remember the great Red Wing teams of the 90s. There
Right.
was no salary cap. So you had Detroit, you had Toronto, you had the New York Rangers outspending everybody 2 to 3 to 1.
Right.
You don't have that now. You've got a salary cap, and that's kind of even the playing field. So that's why you're looking at original 6 teams that are going through rebuilds, where you've got the Tampa Bays, the Anaheim, some of these newer Sunbelt teams taking off because the field is even.
Yeah, it's funny how you mentioned that. The Montreal Canadiens haven't sniffed a Stanley Cup in ages. The Toronto Maple Leafs haven't won a Stanley Cup, I believe, since 1955, before I was
67, yeah,
born.
right.
Right. Was it? Oh, that's
Yeah,
right. Was it?
67. But
Oh,
yeah, no, your
67.
points. Yeah. It's a very even playing field in the National
Right.
Hockey League, where this is a bad example this year, but you've got a guy, Connor Bedard.
Right.
He's a transformative player. I mean,
Right.
and any team could have had him. He could have gone to Columbus. He ends up in Chicago. Bad example, but he could have gone to Arizona. He could,
Right.
this plays in a 5,000 seat college arena. He could have gone to, any of these other. He ends up Chicago. Okay, but they won fair and square. They got the ping pong balls, and there you are.
Well, let's flip the numbers. Okay, 67, but was 55 years ago. So, if you're looking for a
That's where you're
four-digit
thinking.
lottery number, that George Richards and I are going to say 67-55. If you win, neither of us want to know about it. Otherwise, we're going to be pulling our hair out. Then again,
That's
we're in
right.
heads. So what's the difference? Who cares? 67-55. There's your four-digit here in the state of Florida. There you go. All right. Let's talk about the Panthers President's Trophy. We talked a little bit about under Andrew Brunette. Tough circumstances that Brunette had to deal with. Do you think he ever had a chance to get the full-time job? And the follow-up is, are you happy that he got the Nashville gig?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
I don't think that Andrew Brunette had the Panthers, I think, gone, played better in that second round series against Tampa Bay. I think Andrew Brunette would have had a pretty good chance of keeping the Panther job
Okay.
full time. But, and this is no knock on Andrew Brunette. He had only been behind the bench as an assistant coach for a couple years, much less being an interim head coach. And that inexperience showed. And there were some grumblings within the organization. I heard from past players who basically thought that they got out coached. They felt like the Panthers did not adjust in round 1 against the Washington Capitals and just were better than Washington, and completely got out coached against Tampa Bay in that 4-game sweep, and told Bill Zito that in exit interviews. And that's why he decided to make a change. Plus the fact that he was looking, if there was not a good fit for the Panthers, Andrew Brunette may have kept that job. But when he talked to Paul Maurice, he liked it. They had a great conversation. Paul Maurice, I know a lot of fans didn't like it, but when I heard that Paul Maurice was interested in the Panthers, I was like, well, he's the guy, right? I mean, he's the guy. You're going to hire Paul Maurice. He's been around 25 years of coaching. He coached the Hartford Whalers. That's how long he's been coaching, and he's still 52, 53 years old. It was just a deal where the Panthers wanted experience. They did not want to go through another playoff where you had a veteran guy behind the bench getting out coaching your young guys. So they felt like Paul Maurice has seen everything. He wasn't going to get out coached, and you saw that pay off this playoff because Paul Maurice knew what was going on. Paul Maurice pushed all the right buttons in the playoffs. So that point paid off. To your second point, yes, I'm very happy that Andrew Brunette's getting an opportunity with the Nashville Predators. Barry Trotz is the new general manager there. They know each other. Andrew Brunette played for Barry Trotz with the original. He was an original member of the Nashville Predators. And this will be a great opportunity for Andrew Brunette to put his stamp on a team that barely made the playoffs last year. There aren't a whole lot of expectations on Nashville. They're a borderline playoff team, yay, or, it could go either way. He's going to have an opportunity to really to develop himself as a coach. And let's not forget, he left the Panthers. When the Panthers hired Paul Maurice, he went to New Jersey. He got a year to coach under, the coach, Lindy Ruff. Lindy Ruff.
Yeah.
He got a year of experience coaching under Lindy Ruff. And I know in his mind, he was paying attention, knowing that he was going to be a head coach moving forward. That's another thing. He coached under Joel Quenneville. I think Andrew Burnett was totally comfortable just coaching under Joel Quenneville. He didn't expect to be being a head coach next year, or much less in October of 2021. That all happened so fast. I think it kind of did catch him by surprise. This did not. So he was paying, I think, more attention to the small little things that Lindy Ruff did. It's going to really help him in Nashville.
So George, this is a great segue to what you just said. So I'll go over it again. We talk about the coaching change to Paul Maurice. You told me at a Marlins game that the Panthers record would not be as good as the President's Cup trophy season. Then again, that was a heck of a year anyways.
Right.
But they'll actually be a playoff team. And boy, you nailed a bullseye with that. And the reason why I say that is what you just reiterated, because they had a good track record in the playoffs to begin with. So if there's anybody that has an I told you so moment that could brag, it's you, because you nailed it with Paul Maurice. Let's face it, had good years with the Carolina Panthers. I believe he took them to a Cup final, only I think to lose if I remember correctly.
Right, lost to Detroit.
Well, yeah, that really broke my heart. No, hardly not. They were actually calling that the Hockey Town versus Opie series. Right. And, I got to go back to my roots a little bit here too, George. Yeah. But it was pretty good. But yeah, while they did get an experienced guy, and evidently that's what it sounds like it took for the Panthers to be able to walk right in. We're not going to talk about the fact that they got in the way they did. We're just going to talk about Paul Maurice at the moment. So go ahead.
Well, the thing I told you was something that was relayed to me in a conversation I had a day or two after Paul Maurice got hired. We talked a little bit about his experience, and he talked about Andrew Burnett. He said, listen, we're not going to be as good as we were last year. You know that. I know that. It's just how it is. Nobody's going to match that 122 points. He goes, people are going to want 123 next year, and that ain't going to happen. He didn't think it was going to be as tight as it was, but he was like, let's just get to the playoffs. We'll worry about the rest when it comes. That was another concern with the Panthers. They weren't sure. The Panthers knew they needed to change their style of play to be a successful playoff team. And if they kept Andrew Burnett, and he would have changed he would have changed everything. But the first time that team loses 3-4 games in a row, there may have been panic, and you change everything. And let's just go back to what works. It doesn't matter. Let's just win some games and we'll get back on track. Paul Maurice never did that. And the Panthers knew he would. The Panthers knew he would stick to the plan because he's been there. He's done that. What are you going to do? Fire me? He doesn't care. So he was going to stick to the plan. And luckily for them, they make the playoffs because, listen, with a week before the season ends, it was no assurances that they were going to make the playoffs, but they did. And now I think that's how the Panthers are looking at things. We don't care about the Atlantic. We don't care about the Presidents. Just tell us where we're playing. That's how Tampa Bay treats hockey. Tampa Bay, just tell us where we're at. Oh, we're in Toronto for round one. We'll see you there. They don't care about anything else. That's how Florida's dealing with it. Just tell us where we're going to play. And that's the way you got to be when you're at this point. Teams like Buffalo, Detroit, Ottawa, they just want to make the playoffs too. Florida, you have to assume, you have to have that expectation that you're a playoff team. And 3, 4, 5 years ago, that wasn't the case here. You were just, are the Panthers now the expectation is you're a playoff team and we'll go from there. And that's a big step forward for the Panthers.
So, all right, let's talk about the 2022-23 season overall. What were your observations? Now, I know full well that they made the trade for Matt Tkachuk, I believe, for Jonathan Huberdeau, and give me the other guy I'm trying to remember.
Mackenzie Weegar.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. What were your initial thoughts about when that trade was made? And you also had Sergei Bobrovsky coming back as well. And, of course, they had higher expectations for Spencer Knight, which didn't unfortunately come to fruition yet. Not that he's out of the picture by any means, but that was a game changer that once again, the Wizard of Sunrise, okay, was able to roll the dice and he rolled them very, very big.
Yeah. Yeah. Last year was obviously a different setup. I mean, listen, um, a lot of people got emotional with the whole Matthew Tkachuk trade. Jonathan Huberdeau, a fan favorite, franchise leader, and everything that Sasha Barkov doesn't own, Jonathan
Right.
Huberdeau owns. So he'd been here since 2011 when he was the number 3 overall pick. People loved him, but he had the Panthers painted in a corner when it came to a contract. He was due an extension. He wanted a max deal. And at 31 years old, I don't think that the Panthers were in that big of a hurry to give it to him. And I don't think they were going to give it to him. You fast forward to mid-June, mid-July, and Matthew Tkachuk, out of nowhere, is now on the market. He's available. He'll only go to a handful of places. Florida's one of them. And Bill Zito saw that as an opportunity, not only to get a player of Matthew Tkachuk's caliber, because Matthew Tkachuk is one of the top 5-10 players in the entire league. But he also found a way to solve his Jonathan Huberdeau problem. And that was trade Huberdeau. And that's what they did. And I don't think a lot of fans understood that as much as you love Jonathan Huberdeau, in 2, 3, 4 years, he's going to be 34, 35 years old. Do you really want him making $10 million a year? I don't think you do. You got Matthew Tkachuk. He's in the prime of his year. This is it's only going to get better for Matthew Tkachuk. You think Matthew Tkachuk was good in Calgary? Wait till you see what he does here. He's going to become an absolute superstar. Jonathan Huberdeau's best years, God love him, might be behind him. Now he's going to have a bounce back year this year. He is, right. And he'll be good next year. He is. But his best years are behind him. Matthew Tkachuk's are in front of him. That's why the Panthers made the trade. That's why the Panthers are paying him the money. And listen, I said it at the time. If Calgary can sign Jonathan and or one of them, if they could get Huberdeau or Weegar to sign, it's a win-win trade because the Panthers got what they wanted. Calgary ends up signing both of them. They got both Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar to sign long-term deals. They both got contracts they would not have gotten with the Panthers. So God bless them. It's going to work out fine for Calgary. Matthew Tkachuk wasn't staying there. Now they got 2 players. Those contracts won't look very good in 4 or 5 years, but for right now, they've got 2 very good players in Mackenzie Weegar and Jonathan Huberdeau.
Yeah, so when you talk about the 2022-23 season, here's a team that obviously makes it to the playoffs during the last few days of the year. So they were, in my opinion, playing playoff hockey all year just to get to the point where they were battle tested is what they were, George. Nowadays I don't get to as many games as much as I used to anywhere because let me tell you where I'm at right now is not only am I the publisher of the Tribune, but I recently taken a position as president of broadcasting for Media Studios, the Eagle Communications Department. We're building a broadcasting division from scratch, and I'll have a lot of responsibilities developing podcasters and all that. So I don't have as much time to get on the road as I like to. Don't get me wrong. Everybody likes to go out and be in the box.
Sure.
So it's not like I don't want to go. It's just my responsibilities have reached a point where it's just tough because I don't have dependable people under me that I trust to do the job that every organization that depends on expects me to do. I don't want to hear any backlash later. So, but what I think, it doesn't mean I don't watch what's going on, though. Obviously, I have the ability to get the releases when the communications department does a great job sending them to me. And of course, I don't watch games. But I think my point is this, okay, when you have a team that's really playing, playoff hockey all year just to get in, and they make these changes, the coaching staff, and they have a lot of guys that are actually going out there and performing well. I think in a couple career years, give me a couple of guys that you had bigger years outside of Matt Kachuk. I know their names are off the top of my head, but
Well,
unfortunately, I don't.
Verhage had a big year. Verhage had a
Right,
big year. You had a nice year from Gudis, who's no longer here. Reinhardt played well. Sam Bennett, you know,
right,
Barkov was Barkov. You know, he
right,
had some down times, but what you say is something that the Panthers talked about. They say that they'd been playing, and I don't know if I even buy this. They say they've been playing playoff hockey since January.
right.
But they knew if they lost a game in Pittsburgh or whatever, it wasn't going to end their season, and that's always in the back of your head. But when they got going, when they started playing well in March, yeah, those games had weight on them because they were
Right.
looking at those standings. Hey, we're 5, 6, 7 points out of the playoffs. And they knew, hey, we got 15 games left. We got to go 12-3, basically. They knew that, and that did carry into the playoffs, even though, they're down 3-1 to the Boston Bruins. They did play pretty good hockey in those first 3 games of the Bruins series.
Yeah, you know what? Amazingly enough, this Matt Kachuk trade reminds me a little bit about what we're seeing, George, this summer with Lionel Messi going to Inter Miami. Now, obviously, is it on that level? I don't know. I'm not going to even venture that it is. But for the Florida Panthers, when you get a marquee talent in his prime doing what he does, and you know you can keep him for a while, Lionel
Yeah.
Messi, to me, don't take it the wrong way, it's probably a 2 or 3 year fix if he stays healthy. Whereas on the other hand, Matt Kachuk to me has more guts than any player I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of good players in my days covering the league, being in and around it for the last 30 some odd years. But define to our audience what your thoughts are of Matt Kachuk and what he brings, not only short term to this team, but what the Panther fans have to look forward to long term, knowing full well that we have Alexander Barkov as certainly the face of the franchise. I wouldn't be surprised to see a couple of names retire. We already saw Roberto Luongo's get his retired. Barkov is probably inevitable. And if Kachuk stays along, I wouldn't be surprised to see his name up there either.
Yeah, I agree with that. Not the Messi thing. I don't agree with the Messi. I mean, Messi's 36 years old.
Right.
Or whatever he is. He's the best player in soccer, and now he's playing AA soccer. Basically, you know what I
Okay.
mean?
Well, no, I don't agree with
And
that.
it's showing. I mean, the level of competition that he's playing against in the MLS is not even close to what he's used to. That's why he's dominating. That's why he's scoring
Right.
2 goals a game. He wasn't doing that playing in Europe. He's doing that here because it's not good soccer. I'm not even a soccer guy, and I know that's not good soccer.
Well, you know what then, George? You know what that means? I disagree with myself too because you're calling it AA soccer.
It's
Okay.
double.
You
It's
convinced
minor.
me.
It's not the big leagues. It's major
Okay.
league by name, but it's not big league soccer, and everybody knows it. He came here. He would only go to Miami, but
Right.
he's a gigantic superstar. I'm not questioning Messi. He's the best player maybe to ever play. I mean, you got Pele, you've got Maradona, you got
Right.
Messi. He's the best. There's no doubt about it. But he's playing, in the MLS, and he's going to make a lot of money doing it. Now, that said, he's a much bigger star than Matthew Tkachuk, but he's a much bigger star than worldwide than Michael Jordan. So, I mean, in the South Florida Pantheon, I mean, you've got Tua, you've got Jimmy Butler, right? Jazz Chisholm, and Tkachuk, and Messi's in this whole different planet. I mean,
Right.
that's a whole different world. But Matthew Tkachuk is part of that, man. And you say that Sasha Barkov, and I agree with you. Barkov is the captain. He is the face of the Panthers. But Matthew Tkachuk, after what he did in the playoffs, he was the guy that was being invited to talk to Charles Barkley. He has become kind of the face of the team because he's gregarious. He's open. He's fun-loving.
Right.
Barkov's very quiet. He's not your rah. Barkov never would have scored the winning goal and pointed to the exits and say, "Come on, let's go to the bus." Barkov never would have done that. Tkachuk did, and people love it. I mean, people love it. I mean, it's like pro wrestling with Tkachuk. I mean, he's a terrific player, but he's got showmanship.
Right.
Barkov doesn't have that, and they're two different guys when it comes to that. But yeah, I mean, Tkachuk is only going to get better, man. He's only going to get better.
Well, it's amazing enough when the Panthers had a little rush stretch during, I think, the spring, and Kachuk was angry. He didn't come here to lose. If
That's
that
right.
doesn't tell you what kind of a character he is, I don't know. But I'm going to go back to a long time Detroit reference. I don't know how many people remember this name. Maybe you might
Ty
because you've been
Cobb?
around it. Huh?
Ty Cobb?
No, no, no. Now, this if you're really a hockey guy, though, a guy by the name of Dennis Polonich. You ever heard of him?
No.
Yeah, this guy here was a young guy, or maybe Dino Ciccarelli. Does that one jog you a little bit?
I know
I
Dino.
think Dino
Sure.
Ciccarelli to me reminds me a lot of Matthew Kachuk, okay, because of the
Okay.
fact that they're scrappy guys and they are winners. Now
Yeah.
nobody will know anything about Dennis Polonich except a guy like me. The only thing I can tell you about Dennis Polonich, George, is he led the team in penalty minutes and he got in more scraps than anybody on the planet. Okay, now why am I bringing him up? He's a feisty young guy. I like these
Yeah.
feisty guys, man. I really do. But Dino Ciccarelli, if you're a hockey fan, to me reminds me of Matthew Kachuk. And
Okay.
George, you're free to use my Dino Ciccarelli thing on any of your shows you go on. All you need to do is just Google up Dino Ciccarelli and then let me know.
Oh, I know
We'll be
Dino. Yeah, I
fans.
mean, he's a Hall of Famer. I mean, yeah, did play for the
Exactly.
Panthers. Don't forget, Dino Ciccarelli was the first Florida Panther in the Hall of Fame.
Really?
Yeah,
I
you
didn't
didn't know that, did you? He played parts of
No,
2
but
seasons here at the end of his
nothing
career.
like
But here's the thing with Kachuk, and just like Ciccarelli, that's what they call him, the unicorn, right?
okay.
Because Kachuk is never going to go quiet. He might have 0 goals, 0 points, but you knew he was playing, right? You knew he played that game. That was another thing with Jonathan Huberdeau. If Jonathan Huberdeau didn't score, you didn't know he was on the ice. And
Right.
that's not the case when it comes to Matthew Kachuk. Now, most games he's going to have at least an assist, but he's going to drive the net. He's going to tick off one of the defensemen around the goalie. He's going to do something that is part of the game. And that's what the Panthers really like about him. But he's extremely skilled. He's got terrific hands. He's got a terrific net presence. He's going to score. He's got back-to-back 100-point seasons. And he's the guy that he's an instigator too. So
Right.
the Panthers just love his style of play.
Well, I mean, who wouldn't? I mean, think about
Right.
it. The guy is a rough player. He has a rugged side where he scores goals. I mean, you talk about an all-around hockey player. Max Kachuk is unquestionably one of those, and
Sure.
obviously what we've described here validates that. So, all right, George, let's go to the playoffs. We talk about the Florida Panthers being heavy underdogs to the Boston Bruins. Now, mind you, the Panthers were the President's Cup trophy winner, and now you have the Boston Bruins. So God only knows what we really think of the President's Cup trophy. I'm going to ask you that question. What do you think of the President's Cup trophy, and do you think it's an overrated curse?
Yeah, I mean, because teams have won. They've won the President's Cup and they've won. And yeah, but I don't think anybody's done it since the Blackhawks in 13 or 14 are the last President's Trophy winners to win it. But the President's Trophy, like when the Panthers won it a couple of years ago, it wasn't like they were trying to win it. It was just there. I mean, why? Yeah, you're playing Philadelphia on a Tuesday night. You might as well win the game, right? I mean, win the game. And then, Thursday night, you got Montreal. You might as well win the game. And they just kept those last 2 weeks. They just kept winning games. And it wasn't like they were gunning for it. It just was there. They had a 6-point lead on Toronto, and it was either lose 5 in a row and let somebody else have it or just win it. So, and they didn't, to your earlier point about they weren't sharp, though, going into the playoffs because they cruised into the playoffs.
Right.
There was no, you could have a bad night and be like, whatever. And they couldn't have that this year. And it kind of changed. They had a whole different attitude going into this year's playoffs. But I do think there is something about, and we see it in baseball, don't we? We see these teams that have a 20-game lead and they cruise into the playoffs. Sometimes their pitching just isn't all that sharp and they end up losing, before the championship series. It's like that in any sport. I mean, even football, you see these 14-2 teams in the NFL, and then they got to, they get the bye week and they haven't really played a meaningful game in 2 months and they don't look right. They're still the best team. They just don't look right. That's really all it is. I think it is as far as a curse goes. But we always said that you never see an 8 seed beat a number 1 seed in the basketball, but you see it all the time in hockey. Hockey play now, that's not true anymore because the Heat just beat the Milwaukee Bucks, the 8-1.
Right.
But you always see that in hockey. You always see the 7 seed beat a 2 seed or 6-3. You always see those upsets early. So hockey is just a different animal when it comes to the playoffs. And you just get in, baby. Just get in. It doesn't matter if you're the 8 seed, the 7 seed, and it doesn't matter if you're the 1 seed or the 2 seed. Just get in, because home ice doesn't really matter. Just get in. And that's what, the Panthers are just, it's not like the Panthers proved it. They're just another on a long list of teams that got in and did something.
During that series against Boston, everybody thought Boston would steamroll the Panthers.
Sure.
They did. Let's face the reality. They were playing great hockey. They broke every single regular season record on the planet, which, to me, reminds me of the New England Patriots going undefeated until the Super Bowl, because that's where I feel like there's a distinct connection between the two. But now you have a Panthers team playing against a heavily favored Bruins. So I've got to ask you, George, do you feel that the Florida Panthers were playing on house money?
I do, to an extent, yes, because they were down 3-1 in that series to Boston.
Right.
And end up coming back and winning that game in overtime. Sergei Bobrovsky makes a big save on Patrice Bergeron on a breakaway in the final seconds of the third. And then Aaron Ekblad almost pushes the puck, trying to clear the puck away, almost knocks it into an empty net. If that goal scores, the Panthers lose that series in 5, and we're having a completely different conversation about how this Panther season went, right? Then we're saying, well, they just barely made the playoffs. They shouldn't have been a playoff team. Look, Boston beat them in 5. They shouldn't have been there. We've got some result bias here because we saw them come back. We saw them beat 2 more teams and make it all the way to the final. Listen, I think we're going to look back on that season and say it was a terrific season, but it wasn't a terrific season in January. It wasn't a terrific season at Christmas time. People were calling for the heads of the Stahl brothers. People didn't like Maurice. But this year's team now, I think, has a little bit, they're going to get a little rope. I mean, if this team starts off bad with the injuries that they've got, I think they're going to be, given a little latitude, because now people are like, yeah, just make the playoffs. Don't worry about it. And that's something we've always said about the Heat, because the Heat have proven it year after year. Just get there, Miami Heat. We don't care, because Miami Heat has a similar season to the Panthers. The Miami Heat were frustrating this regular season, but they were the Miami Heat, so they were given a little latitude. I think that moving forward, maybe the Panthers are going to start getting some of that from the public.
Well, both of us obviously have been around the hockey business a long time, so that'll lead me to my next question, and that's this. Okay, there's that adage that goes out there that a hot goalie can carry a team all the way to the title, and I'm going to tell you right now, Sergei Bobrovsky rescued the Panthers with the Bruins, and the experience of Paul Maurice enabled him to follow his experience instinct to let him ride him all the way to the Stanley Cup final. Well, it's pretty hard for both of us to disagree about a hot goaltender, because we've seen it 9 million times in this league, haven't we?
Yeah, you've seen guys like Carey Price. I mean, my goodness. Well, Carey Price is a bona fide Hall of Famer, but you've seen no-name goalies that nobody's ever heard of come in the playoffs and lead and backstop a team to the conference finals. Absolutely, you can ride a hot goalie, and that's why NHL general managers shy away from giving goaltending, unless that guy's a bona fide Hall of Famer. You're not giving out the big bucks, because you can just find it's almost like rolling the dice. Who's our goal? Look at Vegas. Right. Look, the guy who won the Stanley Cup for the Vegas Golden Knights was he was their number 3 goalie. Right. And he wasn't their starter up until like midway through the second round. So goalies are weird, man, and they just get on rolls. And yes, you can ride a hot goalie, because nobody in the second round, when they were down, I think 2-1 to the Edmonton Oilers, was talking about the Vegas Golden Knights winning the Stanley Cup, because they certainly didn't look like it. Then Aiden Hill comes in and starts, looking unreal. And he won some wild shootouts. I think they had a 6-5 game against Dallas and whatever it was, but he was terrific, and he was terrific against Florida. And he's not a big name player. They got him from the San Jose Sharks. I don't think many people in Vegas even knew who he was when they acquired him. So,
well, amazingly enough, a guy that stands out in my mind was a guy by the name of Mike Vernon.
Sure, absolutely, Mike. Yeah,
he's a goaltender that really, to me, is one of the most underrated goaltenders in NHL history.
Another former Panther.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. Well, what is Dino Ciccarelli business and Mike Vernon? For all
That's
you
right.
Panther historians, I guarantee you, Dino Ciccarelli, Mike Vernon is definitely worth a tune in, and George and I are laying it. So let's talk about the Stanley Cup Finals. Prior to this appearance, the Panthers had never won a game in the Stanley Cup Finals. This year, though, they win 3 rounds, so you get rid of the postseason business. All right, they won 4 rounds in the past 2 years, but now they finally won a Stanley Cup Finals game.
Yeah.
At least that's one gorilla that they got off their back, wasn't it, George?
That's for the deepest. Yeah, going 5 in the Stanley Cup Finals, as deep as this franchise has ever gone. Yeah. And that was a good win for them. And listen, they were this close to tying game 4 in Sunrise. And if Matthew Tkachuk doesn't, fracture his sternum and can actually hold a stick, maybe Florida wins game 4 as well. I'm not saying Florida wins the series, because it was obvious that Vegas was the better team. Then the scores kind of bear that out. But listen, they could have won 2 in that, and it could have gone to 6. But it is what it is. I think that this team had a very memorable postseason run. I mean, you come back against Boston, which is unbelievable, and you figure, hey, they're out of gas. They are out of gas. And then they steamroll. They go up 3-0 on Toronto, and then they sweep Carolina after having a 4-game, a 4 overtime game in game 1, and then they get a 10-day break. That didn't help them, but very interesting. It was a heck of a playoff for the Panthers.
All right, George, we're going to the chat room. You ready for a little bit of fire up action? Here we go. Let's start with what's up, boys. Mitch Weinstein.
Hey, Mitch.
How are the bagels, George?
Always good. Always good.
It's Stem's birthday.
Yeah, I know. I already said hello to Stem. All right, we're good. Okay. Are the Panthers going to make any more? There, I see it now. Mitch. Hi, Mitch. No, I don't. I mean, minor moves. If the Panthers make any moves now, they'll be minor. I mean, we're already in August. The team's up against the salary cap. Maybe they invite a couple veteran guys to camp on PTOs like they did last year with Eric Stahl. Maybe Eric Stahl is one of the guys they invite. They've got a little bit of wiggle room on the salary cap, but as far as the big trade happened on Sunday. That was Pittsburgh getting Erik Karlsson from the San Jose Sharks in a 3-team deal. The Panthers don't have the kind of cap space for that. So, that was never a deal that Florida was interested in.
Right. So, yeah, I guess that was my next question before Mitch mentioned, what are your thoughts? Well, let's talk about your thoughts about the Panthers offseason moves this year.
Okay. I think they filled some needs. And this is something that Bill Zito talked about. Everybody looked at the Panthers having $10 million under the cap. But because they don't know when Aaron Ekblad and Brandon Montour are going to be able to play again, they had to fill those players' shoes, at least initially. So it actually took away from what Florida could spend during the offseason, because they had to sign players that they can fit in under the cap when Aaron Ekblad and Brandon Montour come back. So I thought under those constraints, the Panthers got deeper defensively. That was one complaint I had all year last year, that the Panthers weren't very deep defensively. But that was part of the Tkachuk trade. You traded away one of your top defensemen in Mackenzie Weegar, and then you were cap strapped. So there really wasn't anything they could do about it. You did not expect Mark Stahl to play 82 games plus every game in the playoffs. So 90 something playoff games. Um, you got Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who's had a miserable 2 seasons in Vancouver, gets bought out. I mean, what a check they are spending it. Vancouver's spending a ton of money for him just to get out of there. But he's had injuries. He's had foot injuries. Maybe this long off season and something to prove. He's playing for a contract. That could be good for him. So we'll see. Oliver Ekman-Larsson, I think, could have a great bounce back. Mike Riley, a defenseman who got cap blocked in Boston. That's a good defensive move. Dmitry Kulikov has joined the Panthers again. We'll see what happens there. He's a good depth piece. He's 32 years old now. He's not the player that he was, but he's a good defenseman. And they bring in a guy to replace the Radko Gudas leaves, Mikko Ratola. I believe I forget his name anyway. Nico Mikkola. Comes over from the New York Rangers as a free agent. They gave him, I believe, a 3-year deal. And, he's a defenseman. So the Panthers were able to shore up their defense. And they added some forward depth as well. Kevin Stenlund comes in. He's going to replace Eric Stahl as the fourth-line center. He's, 27 years old. He's got a little bit of scoring punch. Nothing like what Eric Stahl had back in the day. But if he can match Eric Stahl's offensive numbers, he's going to be able to give you more minutes on that fourth line, and they should be okay there.
So let's talk about some of the guys, we'll call them subtractions. Are there any of the subtractions that you think that the Panthers might miss the most?
Yeah, Radko Gudas.
Yeah.
Yeah, anytime you lose a guy like that, as popular as he was, not only outside, but inside that locker room, he's a big hitter. I think his defensive play was underrated. And it really wasn't underrated when it comes to the hockey people, because he got a lot of good financial offers because he is a strong defensive player, and other teams noticed that, and he had to take the money. Florida couldn't offer him what other teams were. Your Detroit Red Wings were offering him a bundle. I thought he was going to Detroit for sure. He ends up going to Anaheim for $4 million a year. The Panthers probably could have offered him $2.5 million. Right. How about 2 years at 2.5, 2 years at $3 million? He couldn't do that. He's got a family to think of. This is his last big contract. He had to take it. The Panthers understand that, but they're trying to replace him with some depth. Not having Montour and Ekblad initially because of the injuries sustained for Ekblad during the season and in the playoffs. Montour during the playoffs. That'll hurt him initially. And Anthony Duclair, forgot about him, traded to the San Jose Sharks. He'll definitely be missed because he was a very popular part of that Panther locker room. And, a guy that you could slide up and down the lineup. He could play fourth line, first line, mostly top 6 minutes. But if you needed some stability down low, you could always throw Duclair down there. Whatever you needed, he did. So they're definitely going to miss the versatility of Anthony Duclair.
George,
and the skill. I mean, he's a 30-goal guy a couple years ago.
So, George, describe what your observations are about the Panthers' recent draft class.
Hard to judge. The Panthers don't have a whole lot of draft stock. Their first pick was in the second round. It's a player that, a lot of people had, some people had picked as being a first-round pick. He drops all the way to the end of the second round. So we'll see. Time will tell. Anytime you have a draft, unless you're picking in the top 3 or 4, you're not going to see these guys for years. So, and especially the Panthers were just reaching. They're trying to hit home runs. They're trying to find guys in the 5th round that nobody else has seen. There are a couple guys that the Panthers picked that we couldn't even find information of, much less a photo of, because they're trying to swing for the fences. They're like, what the heck? If we can get this guy in the 6th round, who our scouts think nobody knows about, and this guy could be the next Carter Verhaeghe or something out of nowhere, you got to go for it. So they don't have a whole lot of draft picks. So I think that what they've got, they're swinging at the fences. So we'll see. We'll see. Like I said, I think that last guy they picked, we couldn't even find a picture of, but we'll see how it goes.
Isn't that amazing? Here we are in this information age, okay, where you can get everything, and we can't find nothing on these players. My goodness!
It used to be, the old days in the draft, you'd be looking through the book and you'd be like, oh, okay, that's he's ranked number 189th in North. Now you just you look it up. We couldn't find a picture of the guy. I think he was from Russia, from the KHL. He's like an overage guy. Who knows? But if the guy turns out, what do you? Then great. You spend a 7th-round pick. Who cares?
Yeah, you know what they call those in regular world, George? Call them hidden gems.
Yeah, hidden gem. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
It was a 7th-round pick. What do we care?
Yeah, right. As long as they work out, who cares? All right. So, George, let's tell the fans of what your expectations are for the 23-24 season.
Just make the playoffs. Just
Okay.
don't worry about it. I mean, look at it like I said, look at it like Tampa Bay does. Look at it like, some of those teams out west, the Colorado Avalanche. Did the Colorado Avalanche ever panic? 2 years ago, they were 4 or 5 points out of the playoffs in December, and they knew they'd be fine. They end up winning the Stanley Cup. Last year, same thing. They're out of the playoffs. Everybody's like, oh, what's wrong with Colorado? They end up making the playoffs with no problem. Just make the playoffs. Just make the playoffs. I don't know how they're going to do on on November 10th against Philadelphia. I don't know what they're going to do in January against Columbus. Doesn't matter. Just win your game, win some games, make the playoffs, and then we'll see what happens. Get everybody healthy. Maybe, if they've got some cap clearance by the trade deadline, maybe they can be buyers at the deadline. They don't have any draft picks to deal so that hurts them. But let's just see what happens. Should be fun.
So it sounds like for the time being, when you look at the Panthers right now, it sounds like not only with trades, but they're going to have to depend on building this club mainly through free agency. Would you say that's what it sounds like to me when you lose a fair amount of draft capital?
But that also happens when you're a good team, right? I mean,
right.
Because even when you're, let's say, the Tampa Bay Lightning and you're drafting 28th, 29th, 30th in the first round, that's a 2nd-round pick. That's still, you may never see that guy. It's when you're really bad and you don't have 1st-round picks, that's where it affects you because, oh my gosh, we could have been picking 4th and we traded away our pick, and that's happened. That's happened a many a time in hockey where a team is just stunk, but they traded away their 1st-round pick, and now they don't have that to replenish. That's a problem. With the Florida Panthers, you're going to be picking 28th, 29th, 30th anyway. So that 1st-round pick becomes like a 2nd-round pick. So whatever.
It's true. You bring up an interesting point. For a lot of those that are non-Florida people, we have the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Florida Panthers. This has been a pretty good opportunity to see this rivalry develop over the years, especially now that both clubs have become a lot better.
Yeah, it definitely has. And I think that you saw the last couple of years, 21 and 22, the Sunshine State series getting, pretty heated. Tampa Bay won the 1st round in 2021, beat Florida in the 2nd round in 22. Last year, it didn't have the juice that it usually does, but it was still a heated series. It's definitely, for the first time in our lives, the Panthers and Lightning are good at the same time. Usually when, in the early 90s, the late 90s, when Florida was good, Tampa was terrible. When Tampa was good, in 2004, with the Tortorella era, the Panthers stunk. Now they're both playing at a high level at the same time. It's good for hockey. I think it's good for hockey, not just hockey in Florida. I think it's good for hockey when you can see 2 teams from those non-traditional markets having those kind of series. It does draw interest from outside the country because people are like, what's with the palm trees and all that? And then you see these guys just killing each other. And it's kind of fun.
One last thing I want to mention before we wrap up this broadcast. Could you ever see Joel Quenneville ever landing back in the NHL, whether it's a coaching job or anything like that? I know he's had time to think about what transpired in Chicago. It's unfortunate that the Panthers had to lose him because he was starting to really turn this franchise around. All of a sudden, this unfortunate situation took place. But Joel Quenneville is a proven championship coach. Me personally, I think he could have won a championship in Florida, but we'll never know. But his blueprint is definitely all over this franchise, especially in the last couple of years. But what do you think? Do you think he's going to land back in the NHL?
First to go to Quenneville, yeah, I mean, that's one thing. The Panthers, a lot of people were talking about the instability in coaching. That merry-go-round of coaches in Florida was supposed to be over with Quenneville. He had a 6-year deal. He was supposed to coach the Panthers until he retired, or until, he just said, okay, well, now we stink again. He wasn't supposed to leave like that. As far as him getting a job, yeah, he's got to talk to Commissioner Gary Bettman. They got to talk some things out, but yeah, I mean, he'll get a job. I mean, there'd be a couple teams lined up. You just saw, what's his name, Babcock, go to the Columbus Blue Jackets.
Right.
You would think that Quinville would be a very attractive hire for a team like Columbus. That would have been a big deal there. And there's many teams like that, and we'll see. It does sound like Joel wants to coach again. He's got some things to answer to. But aside from that, it will have been 3 years. So next summer, maybe we see something.
Yeah, like I said, I enjoyed my time. The one season I was able to cover the Panthers, the 2021 season. But then all of a sudden, my schedule got out of control with everything that was going on around me, from the business side as well as the editorial side. And now I'm hoping one of these days I'll have a chance to get back there. Time will tell, depending on what's going on here. But I'm really just so delighted to be able to talk about this franchise because, let's face it, this franchise has never had the opportunity to get on national television a lot. Do you think that with success like this, that they might eventually start seeing some national television respect?
Yeah, but I mean, listen, I mean, those things now are so weird, right? I mean, ESPN would rather put you on ESPN Plus, the streaming, than on ABC. So listen, when it comes to those games on over-the-air TV, it's always going to be Pittsburgh and Boston and New York, because those, just getting a few people in that one town to watch the games jacks the ratings up. You're not going to see the Panthers very often, on Channel 10 ABC. You will see them on ESPN and TNT, especially after last year. So now that they've got Kachuk, yeah, I think you're going to see them a lot more. The national TV schedule hasn't come out yet, so I would bet that we've got the Panthers on TNT, which is what I consider, the ESPN and TNT to be the national TV, not that ESPN, the streaming stuff. I don't, that doesn't count as a national game. But
yeah,
I think we see them 5, 6, 7 times between TNT and ESPN.
Yeah, I've always thought that national TV is a little bit more biased toward the original 6 teams too, because obviously they know what the history of the league is, and of course, I mean, let's face it, the original 6 is the original 6, regardless of who they are. But obviously, there's a lot of parity in the NHL, as we've seen over the last fair while. So let me go over one more thing here. Just to let everybody know that Fire Up Florida is broadcast around the world. Not just South Florida, around the world, Panthers. So take note of it. We're getting your broadcast everywhere. So, with that said, the audio version of the show can be heard on iHeartRadio. Ever heard it? I have. Apple, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your podcast. Please hit the red subscribe button on YouTube, South Florida Tribune. We're striving for 1,000 subscribers. We're getting there. Plus, also comment, like, and share the broadcast. Want to be a guest? Have some guest possibilities in the chat room. George has certainly seen some of them out there. Send topic ideas to southfloridatribune@gmail.com. If you want to advertise cost efficiently, call me at 954-304-4941, even though George already has it in his phone because he texts a lot anyways. We broadcast live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Our website, www.southfloridatribune.com, Twitter @Tribune South. So with that said, George, I'm glad we had a chance to get you on. So what I want you to do is let everybody know how they can get a hold of you, and also give them the options how they can subscribe to Florida Hockey Now.
Just come on over to FloridaHockeyNow.com. Check out our stuff. Again, we cover the Panthers every single day, even during the dead months like August. Thank goodness we didn't have a very long off season this year. They have been long in the past, but this year wasn't too bad. Now, that said, I still got 6 weeks till the Gophers, the 6 more weeks of winter, so to speak. But yeah, come on over, FloridaHockeyNow.com. If you want to subscribe, it's $3.49 a month for premium content, or $29.99 a year. Most stories are free, but if you become a subscriber, once you sign in, all the advertising disappears, and it's a nice clean. It looks as good as the New York Times, maybe better. So come on over, Florida Hockey Now. Follow me on Twitter @George Richards, and that's it.
Well, I can say is colleagues support each other. This broadcast is evident of that, George. Thank you very, very much for being on the show. I hope you get some new
Yeah.
customers out of it. But more importantly, I think the one thing I have out of you is you're a longtime friend, and I've always been so grateful for the conversations we've had, the fun photos that we've taken, in public. And all I can tell you is you're one of the finest colleagues on the planet. And if anybody deserves a Stanley Cup ring, it's definitely you, George Richards, because
I wasn't getting one.
well, it wouldn't matter. At least you could be a part of a championship team, anyways. I mean, really, I say that out of complete respect, though. I really do. Anybody that can see championship hockey. No, I know you like to get on my case, but remember when I said, folks, okay, what was that 4-digit number that I talked about? We talked about
5567.
What's that?
5567.
Yeah, 55 and 67. Toronto Maple Leafs, 4-digit number, Florida Lottery, whatever. Nobody will care. But if you win, we don't care. We just maybe that'll help you fund your retirement. With that said, I want to thank everybody else for joining us here on Fire Up Florida. My name is Scott Morganroth. Pleased to be joined by George Richards, and hopefully we'll have George Richards down the line again on this show. So meanwhile, thank you very much for joining us, everybody, and we will catch you on the next time. Good night, everybody, from Scott and George.
Good night, Scott. Thank you.